Meanwhile, this is at the same time that you have this huge immigrant influx from Mexico, and you're beginning to get this immense transformation. And then, what made a particular privilege to be at the Weekly at this time was that a political force began to mobilize this immigrant and Latino community in a progressive direction. There had been, obviously, Latino elected officials in LA, since 1949, since Ed Roybal won a seat on the city council, but mainly in the 60s. And they had developed their own networks and machines. And then this new force comes along, which is personified by Miguel Contreras, who had been an official of the Hotel and Restaurant Union, who then became head of the LA County Federation of Labor, the LAAFL-CIO, in 1996, and realized a couple of things. He realized that the labor movement in LA was getting a number of new recruits in unions like the janitors and elsewhere who could be politically active. And he realized, and this was in the wake of the Prop 187, which passed in 1994. Proposition 187 would have excluded undocumented immigrants from illegal immigrants from all kinds of public services, even thrown kids out of school. And there was a huge demonstration against it. Pete Wilson was running for re-election as Republican governor against Kathleen Brown, at that point the Democratic nominee, Jerry Brown's sister, who was state treasurer at the time. And he was trailing in the polls, so he endorsed this, and he campaigned big on an anti-immigrant thing, and was re-elected, and the measure was passed handily and then struck down in the courts. But it led to this sense in the immigrant and Latino community that they had to become politically active. And Miguel Contreras comes into the labor movement and realizes that the labor movement can be the vehicle for this, that they can wage campaigns, electoral campaigns, not only mobilizing their own members, but in the Latino community more broadly. And this was something that had not been tried. Also, no one had tried to walk precincts in Los Angeles in 40 years. It was the conventional wisdom was, it's too big, it's too spread out, no one does it. And I remember back in the days when I had been a political consultant, and there was a quasi-organization called the Waxman-Berman Machine. It didn't have I don't want to attach the negative connotations that the word machine usually implies. It was an alliance of Henry Waxman, a congressman from West LA, and Howard Berman, a congressman from the San Fernando Valley. And what they would do, they would raise a bunch of money from their supporters. They had very affluent districts. And they would use that money to back other candidates they were allied with in other places. But, I mean, the machine, so it was money in, and then message out. They put out their own slate mailers, but it wasn't a machine in the old way, also because there was no room for popular participation. It was, we do a fundraising dinner. We have a fundraising consultant to help us with that. We give the money to our political mail and broadcast consultant. They come up with the mailings and the advertisements. That was what politics was in California, and in Southern California in particular. Too spread out, not dense enough. You don't have enough foot soldiers. You're talking precinct clerk. What are you, nuts? So Contreras developed this whole program. There are about 380 different local unions in the LA County Federation of Labor. And after this program was given a dry run in a few elections in 97 and 98, each of them, they tallied how many shifts their members worked. A shift is you work a phone bank for an afternoon, that's a shift. You walk a precinct for an afternoon, that's a shift. Now, interestingly, the two unions that always come in, number one and number two, are the janitors and the hotel workers. These are unions that were forged in major actions and have an activist core. The irony, and it's huge irony, is that many of these people are undocumented immigrants. They cannot vote themselves, but they can help shape politics. I remember going back to even one of the earliest versions of this, when 187 was on the ballot, and there was this brewing huge Latino backlash. And in a couple of weeks before the election, a number of Latino students staged walkouts at high schools, pointing out that if this passed and was literally enforced, they couldn't go to school, that this would be the wave of the future. And the guy who then headed the county employees union, SEIU local, who was Gil Cedillo, who later went on to be a state legislature. I remember going down in the 94 election, and Gil had recruited a whole bunch of these high school students to do phone banks to Latino voters out of his headquarters. It was down in central Los Angeles, and you could begin to see the genesis of this kind of mobilization. Miguel died of a heart attack sometime, I don't know, it was about 2003, 2004. But by then, several things had happened. First of all, through the County Feds program and a separate program, but overlapping, run by the SEIU, that Eliseo Medina, who's now the Secretary-Treasurer of SEIU, put together, they had pretty much ensured that where the demographics had changed, the politics had changed too. That is to say, up until the mid-late 1990s, all of the outlying areas of LA County, Long Beach, the South Bay, Glendale, Burbank, Pasadena, had been white majority. They were changing, but still had white and more to the point, Republican representation both in the state legislature and in Congress. In 1998, there was a wholesale reshuffling of that, 98 and 2000, so that by 2002, those areas were uniformly Democratic. There might not necessarily be a Latino representative there. And some of the most interesting campaigns the County Fed helped run were campaigns for non-Latino candidates being opposed by Latino candidates, but still prevailing in the Latino community. I think the most interesting early example of that was a school board member who ran for city council in the mid-90s, Jackie Goldberg, who is at that point, it was unusual, but an out lesbian in the mid-90s. If I can speak in the vernacular of my faith, a nice Jewish girl. And she was running against a sort of mainstream Latino candidate, and she had a great pro-labor history, and the Fed backed her, and she carried the district, including the Latino areas of the district, which was showing the clout and persuasive power that the union political program had. So the entire political, one of the net effects of all of this was the fact that California is now regarded rightly as a blue state, a solidly democratic state, with heavily democratic majorities in the congressional delegation and in the legislature. That is really in part simply because of this demographic transformation that the labor movement in LA was able to politicize. And the point of contrast here is Texas. California and Texas each have about the same percentage Latino population, in the mid-30s in each state. And, in Texas, though, there's been no equivalent mobilization of the Latino community. And if you ask me why, I would say the chief reason is that there are virtually no unions in Texas. It's a right-to-work state. The rate of unionization has been under 5% there forever. It's night and day to California. I mean, it also matters that the white population of California is a good deal more liberal than the white population of Texas. But the mobilization of Latinos is the other key differential there.